Welcome to the Everything Board Games podcast. We've got the scoop on the latest board game news, reviews, and interviews. So gather your family and friends and get ready for a board game good time. Plus, don't forget to check out our sister site for the best board game giveaways, thegiveawaygeek.com. Ready, board gamers? Let's get things rolling.
In today's episode of Everything Board Games podcast, I sit down with Lee Broderick, the mastermind behind a new game on Kickstarter called Maeshowe. I think I mispronounced it, but I get it right during the podcast. This game will be on Kickstarter by the time you're listening to this for 39 hours or less. So head on over and check it out. Also, check out our review on everythingboardgames.com. Now, let's get on with the interview, shall we? Welcome to Everything Board Games podcast. Tonight we got a special treat for you. We have the creator and mastermind of a new game that just launched to Kickstarter. Is that right, Lee? Is that how you fit in line with Maeshowe?
That's correct, yeah. Thanks for having me here, Lank.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you so much for joining us on getting on Everything Board Games podcast. We really appreciate it. Now, before we dive into your game and everything, let's rewind a little bit if we could. How did you get into playing tabletop board games, Lee?
It's a story that'll be familiar to a lot of people, I think. We grew up playing the traditional family games in the 80s, and then 1989, there was this little game not a lot of people have heard of, came out called Hero Quest. So, yeah, it was the typical story that's familiar to a lot of board game players. I got really into that with a small group of friends. We quickly moved on to Advanced Hero Quest, and I started designing scenarios and all of those kind of things. Because, Advanced Hero Quest is a bit less well-known maybe, but it's sort of like an RPG experience in a box. So that was a big part of my life in the early 90s. I drifted away from board games, tabletop games in the early 2000s. So yeah, I did a bit of a dalliance with Magic in the 90s, and came back to it again in the 2010s.
Was there a game that got you back into it?
Yeah, again, a similar story to a lot of people. Carcassonne, Hunters and Gatherers. I'm an archaeologist by profession, and about once a year normally I spend a month doing field work. Used to be a month every year out in Mongolia. And one year somebody brought a copy of Carcassonne, Hunters and Gatherers out, and we played that sort of 3-4 times every night for an entire month. And then the following year, the week before we went to go out there, myself and another team member were frantically emailing backwards and forwards saying, has somebody remembered to pack this game? We need to bring this game with us again. So that became a big part of our experience there. I introduced the game to my family, and from there sort of jumped off and started investigating other modern board games.
And I imagine you have quite a collection then?
Yeah, I think, my partner definitely would say I've got a huge collection. It's not as not as big as some people's on Board Game Geek. I try to keep it around or under 100 games.
Have you played them all?
I think there's 6 at the moment that I haven't. I tried. If I haven't played it within a year, then it gets traded away.
Oh wow, that's pretty good. And then you got into designing games. This isn't your first rodeo, though, is it?
It is and it isn't, all at the same time. It's not my first published game. There was an earlier iteration of this game, which I released as a PMP game back in 2016. So that was the first game that I designed. Now, as I say, I used to do a lot of scenario designing back in the early 90s. That was the first game I designed in 2016. And it's been on a long development cycle since, after it got picked up by the publisher 2 years ago. And it's now, it's a vastly improved game over that PMP version that existed 4 or 5 years ago.
Did you play a part in redesigning and stuff after they got it?
Yeah. I mean, it was developer led, and I was really glad about that. I wanted a developer to come on and help knock off some of the rough edges of the game. And when they were appointed, they asked me what I thought the issues were, and I refused to tell them. And after a few weeks, they came back to me and said, I've identified these issues, and those were the same issues that I had. So I was really reassured they were the right developer, and we were both pulling in the same direction. And from that point forward, we worked together, bounced ideas backwards and forwards, it streamlined the game, identified the things that made it fun and interesting, and really drilled down on those.
So what can you tell us about Maeshowe?
I can tell you quite a lot about Maeshowe. I'm imagining most of your listeners have never heard of it. It's a Neolithic burial or mound. We call it a chambered cairn or chambered tomb in Orkney, which is an archipelago off the northeast of Scotland. Like I said to you just now, I am an archaeologist, so I was aware of it anyway. And these sort of chambered tombs exist throughout Britain. They're about 5,000 years old, so slightly older than the pyramids. And they were places that they weren't places for individual burial. They were places for community burial, and they had passages so that people could get into them and continue to interact with their ancestors, and their ancestors played a part in the lives of the living communities around them. Independent of my archaeology profession, years and years ago, I read a lot of the Viking sagas, which some of your listeners may be more familiar with. I think some people think of them as sort of myths and legends, but the sagas is a collective term for some stories that were written down over a period of over 400 years. The early ones certainly do sort of stray into myth and legend and deal with gods and monsters and that kind of thing. And the later ones are written more or less contemporarily with current events on a more like real history. But reading them, you've always got this doubt into your mind as to what's real and what's fantasy, One of the sagas deals with the lives of the Jarls of Orkney. And in there are two events which really stuck in my mind when I first read it. One of which was this treasure hunt, tomb raiding, which took place at Maeshowe. And the Jarls tell that the Jarl went there with his men, and he discovered this enormous mound of treasure, vast wealth, which he then buried and nobody ever found again. So, I thought, that's clearly made up. And then the second event was 3 years later. There was another Jarl moving from one part of Orkney to another at Christmas, and this snowstorm suddenly blew up from nowhere, really reduced visibility, so they desperately sought shelter. They saw what they thought was a house, and they went round and round this house and couldn't find the door, and decided to break off. Decided to break off trying to find the door and to break in through the roof instead. So they went up to try and break in through the roof, and promptly fell through the hole in the roof of Maeshowe that had been made by the tomb robbers 3 years before. So suddenly they were caught in this situation where they'd escaped the storm with their lives, but in order to live and survive another day, they had to dig themselves out of this early grave, basically. And again, this fantastic story, but you think, is it real? Which brings me to the year before I first designed the PMP game, or first released the PMP game of Maeshowe. And at that point, I actually got to visit Orkney, and I went there to see this Neolithic chamber tomb that I knew about. And rather than being astounded by the Neolithic architecture of this monument, it was something very different that caught my eye. And that was inside the tomb is the largest collection of runic textual Viking graffiti outside of Scandinavia. And some of these bits of graffiti purport to be written by the men that were accompanying these Jarls during the tomb break. And I just thought, wow, these stories were real. And that just completely blew my mind. So it was after witnessing that I thought, that more people should know about this story. It's an amazing story. And that was what inspired me to design the game.
So how did you guys know when it was ready to go to Kickstarter then? I know you talked about it having issues beforehand, and you guys both found the same issues.
Yeah. So I think I missed this question there. Like, how did we decide to go to Kickstarter? Yeah. How do we know when it was ready? Okay. It was planned a long while ago. So the publishers released several games through Kickstarter, including my previous game, Dwarf. And it was about 2 years ago, I think, that they decided to, that they told me they wanted to pick this game up and publish it as well. And that was when we first sort of set a schedule, as it were. And we originally sort of set a schedule towards 18 months. So it would have been the Kickstarter last summer. But about this time last year, we said, no, we'd like to have more time and make sure this game's absolutely ready and set to go. I don't think it does anybody any favors, the customers or the publishers, to have a game up on Kickstarter that isn't finished. So about this time last year, say we chose to delay from the summer, put it back 6 months to now, and I think that was the right decision. It's definitely benefited from that extra couple of months of development, and we were able to get preview copies sent out to previewers a few months ago, so that those are all set and ready to go as well. So it's benefited from that delay. But it was important we had a deadline to work to, and then revise that as, say, 6 months out. We didn't panic at the last minute.
Okay, awesome. And the campaign launches when?
It launches on Thursday the 21st, this Thursday, as we're recording the podcast. I'm not sure when you're going to publish it. And that's 9 p.m. UK time, so I think 1 p.m. your time. What are you, Eastern Seaboard there? Pacific. Okay, yeah, so at 1 p.m. your time, and sometime middle of the afternoon for those on the East Coast of America.
It's going to be on Kickstarter for how long?
18 days. I thought it was shorter than that. I just found out last night it's 18 days.
Okay, nothing wrong with that. And so when it comes to Maeshowe, what makes you guys' game stand out as one my audience should go ahead and check out, and they like what they see, back it on Kickstarter today or as soon as they find it there?
First of all, I think it's an utterly unique theme. From two respects. First, the idea that you're trying to break out of a tomb, not break into it and get treasure. In fact, there is treasure in this game, but it has a negative effect. You don't want to find it because that's going to distract you and cause you to to waste time on things other than your own survival. The other unique thing about the theme, I think, is that it's based on a real historical story, but it's not one of mass human suffering like Spanish influenza or like a war or any of those other things. It's a very unique personal survival story, which I think is interesting. So that's sort of the thematic reason to back it. And then if we could look at the actual mechanics, it fulfills something I think a lot of people are looking for. It's a 1 to 2 player co-op, which right now with pandemic is perfect for a lot of people. It has absolutely minimal setup and teardown design, so you can just get it out and play it quick. And it's a quick game of sort of 15 to 30 minutes, but one that has a lot of decision space in it, despite being rules light. So I think it ticks a lot of boxes for a lot of people.
Well, that's always good to hear. Awesome. And yeah, so we encourage anybody listening, if you like what you've heard, or either way, you're listening this far, you might as well go ahead and check out the Kickstarter. That we'll have a link in the show notes so you can check that out. And per se, somebody's listening later on down the road, though, after the Kickstarter's over, is there any secrets in your back pocket of stuff you might be working on, or DTP games you might be working on later on, Lee, that you can share with us?
Yeah, there's always more games that I'm working on. I've got another sort of small game similar to this that I'm working on. A bigger design that I'm working on is a co-design with the developer of Maeshowe. And I'm also currently working on the solo rules for Singularity Sky, which is a game from another designer that's going to be coming to Kickstarter from Dragon Dawn Productions, I think, in about 12 months or later this year. And that's a re-implementation of their earlier game, Phantom League, which was a bit like Elite, the video game. But it's been completely, redeveloped. It's been that sort of redevelopment thing for that has been going on for about 3 years now. And it's re-themed now around Charles Stross's Singularity Sky book universe. So that looks like a really interesting exploration and trading sci-fi game for people that are into that kind of thing. As I say, I'm working on the solo rules for that so that it'll be playable by solo players as well.
So that's pretty cool. And yeah, if you get me, and minus coming there to your hometown to stalk you, how can people go about keeping up with you and everything you're doing, Lee?
Best way to reach out to me is on Board Game Geek, where I'm Cornish Lee. I am on Twitter as well, but I don't check it that often, I must admit. And I actually have my own podcast as well, More Games Than Time, which which I record with a guy here in the UK. We discuss games we've been playing and then have a bigger conversation at the end of the podcast. It's a long podcast, sort of hour and a half to 2 hours, and we bring it out once a month.
Once a month, okay. How do we find that? What is that called again?
More games than time.
Oh, yeah, there is. But you said you already got yours. You said you only didn't play just 6 of them. That's what you said, didn't you?
Yeah, that's right. I try and keep it streamlined, but it's a problem familiar to a lot of us, I think.
I know we have that problem, but yeah, it sounds like you've played more games. Yeah, you played most of your games, it sounds like, so that's good. And that comes out once a month. Is there a certain day during the month, or when should we look for that?
Not normally on the 16th, so we've only been going a couple of months. The second episode just dropped last week.
Okay, awesome. What prompted that?
It would be trite to say lockdown. We've actually been talking, my co-host and I have been talking about doing it maybe for a year or more. We just finally got our act together in December and started doing it.
Oh, there you go.
Hopefully we're bringing something slightly new to the conversation. Maybe it's more of what people are already familiar with. I don't know.
They'll have to listen and find out, huh?
That's right. That's right.
Well, I don't want to keep you all... Well, I guess over there it's morning or whatever. I don't keep you all day. And plus I got to try to get some sleep so I can wake up in the morning as well. But we really appreciate you coming on Everything Board Games to talk all about Maeshowe and what's going to be happening with the Kickstarter and whatever. And we really appreciate that, Lee.
Thanks very much for having me, Lake. It's been really good.
No problem. Have a good one.
Cheers.
Thanks for listening to Everything Board Games. Make sure you're subscribed to the podcast so you never miss our news, reviews, and interviews. And check out our sister site for amazing giveaways at thegiveawaygeek.com. Until then, keep on rolling.